do support some wildlife. They support rabbits, deer, and slugs. And this is not exactly maybe the wildlife you want to be supported. Some people even take down the blossom structures from hostas because they don't like the way it looks or something like that. So even its minimal value as a pollinator is gone. And if you planted, for instance, heuchera, which is also called coral bells instead, some coral bells will bloom more or less all summer long. You've got, you're supporting the tiny pollinators, you're supporting butterflies. It's a much better choice, and it doesn't collapse at the first frost. So there's lots of things to think about when you choose a plant to go in your garden. When plants are not chosen, when they just appear, like Norway maple, you can be pretty sure that it's something you want to really keep an eye on and possibly remove. So I would like to know if anybody has any questions about street trees, the Lexington Street Tree Program, or the high school, or yes?
I just have a question. I haven't lived here for Lexington, but I thought that the Norway maple was an invasive plant and you're not allowed to sell it to anybody?
That's exactly right. Ever since 2009, it's been on the Massachusetts Exotic Invasive Prohibited list, along with more than 100 other species, and you're not allowed to bring it into the state or sell it or even transplant it.
So there's no plans to like remove as many as possible?
Only in my heart, the tree committee's taken a look at this. We did a little inventory of the center blocks of Lexington some time ago, and it was discovered that 37% of the trees were Norway maples. And if we had planned to take them all out, we would be denuding aesthetically the town, as well as, I mean, Norway maples do provide some, some of the benefits of any tree, but we're certainly not planting anymore and haven't in the last 15 years, and we do take them out when we can. Yeah.
My understanding is that the problem with Norway maples is number one, it's a big tree, and native plants can't grow in it.
That's right, they can. They are very greedy trees. They suck up all of the water and sunlight, and they leaf out 3 weeks earlier than native red maples and drop their leaves 3 weeks later, so they've got 6 more weeks of competition. It's a vicious circle. Anybody else? Yes?
I was wondering, does Lexington have a tree preservation bylaw?
Yes, it does. It has a very active one. It came into play in 2001, and the tree committee started in 2001, and we've been actively working on it, refining it, etc. ever since. It's available online on the Town of Lexington website, and it's also available in hard copies at the DBW. Okay. All right. I'm good. I'll be here all day, folks. No. So if you do have any other questions, please approach me afterwards. And thank you very much.
Sonia's going to take a minute to get her. I'll hand this over to Jason from Justin's. My apologies, got flustered there. From Black Earth Compost, who's going to be announcing a program starting in Lexington.
Hey everybody. Yep, I'm Justin Sandler, one of the owners of Black Earth Compost, and we're about a 5-year-old business now. We pick up food waste, or all compostable waste, mainly from restaurants, also from the residential level, pretty much anybody who creates this material. And we take it all back to our farm in Hamilton where we compost it, which thus saves all the nutrients from being lost in the landfills and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. We're up to about 45 tons per week that we haul back to our location. It really started a super grassroots effort based out of Gloucester, just knocking on restaurant doors and asking them if we could have all their food that they weren't eating. But I'm here today to try to get as many residents as we can signed up for a residential program. We have a weekly program where we pick up food waste from residents from any town that we're already kind of located in, and we take that material back to our farm as well. Similar to your trash pickup, but we have a separate container where you collect your compostable material throughout the week. We have a truck out, and that material is also added to the route. So I'm here just trying to get as much density in the city of Lexington as we can, and hopefully we'll get the program going as soon as we can. Yeah, and I do have a table where we can have people sign up right on the spot.
How big are the good sizes?
They're about 10 gallons. Yeah, so the average, we have over, probably in total over 2,000 residents that we do pick up for from cities around. The average amount that we're diverting per resident is about 10 pounds.
Talking about the current school program?
Yeah, we do pick up for the Lexington school system, and it's been going really well here. There's a big committee of volunteers that are helping kind of man the compost barrels, making sure plastics and glass do not get in, and it's been going really well thanks to their efforts.
About meat waste.
Yeah, we take anything compostable, meats, cheese, anything. The rule is anything once that was once alive. Yeah. Even us.
Which towns are you in now?
Our hauling radius is kind of up, so we're based in Gloucester, but we go up to Newburyport, out west to the 495 belt, and then down just south of Boston. So we have a pretty big, kind of the northeast sector now.
I'm sorry, we have a really tight speaker schedule, so what I'm gonna say, he has a table. So when you're done with speakers, go
Yeah.
to there and ask him at the table. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sonia DeMarta, and I'm here to talk about organic farming. But first I'd like to thank Marcia and Ricky and all of the people involved with this event. I know it's a lot of work and it's well needed and obviously well received. So thank you. So I'm here to talk about organic farming because a friend of mine who was very involved with Sustainable Lexington and global warming did not realize the relationship between organic farming and global warming, which really stunned me. So I thought this is something I really need to focus on and educate people about. So organic farming is something that is regulated by the USDA. You cannot call yourself organic unless you have USDA certification. So this is from the USDA. The part that I like the best is the bottom where it says the principal guidelines for organic production are to use materials and practices that enhance the ecological balance of natural system, that integrate the parts of the farming system into an ecological whole. And that speaks a lot to what you do with restoring soils, because organic farming is mostly about soil farming. If the soil isn't healthy, the plants aren't going to be healthy. So what is not allowed in organic farming? No toxic or persistent pesticides or herbicides. They use insect predators, which is why usually the ladybug is a symbol of organic farming. You'll see that a lot because they eat aphids. One time do you guys shop at the farmer's market? Yeah. Yes? So I was helping Rita, who runs the herb pharmacy, and she sells all those beautiful plants, which by the way are organic. She sells a lot of native plants and she grows them herself from seed. So speaking to your issue, try to buy it as much from her as you can. But I said to her, I was out there helping her one day clean out her plants that she was planting in the greenhouse, and one of them was full of aphids. And she said, "Oh no, don't worry, I'll just go get some ladybugs out of the freezer." Okay. So no sewer sludge, synthetic fertilizers. They practice crop rotations to try to trick all the pests. Crop diversity, they do not use GMOs. So if you're trying to avoid eating GMOs, which I strongly recommend, buy organic, which is one of the few ways that you can get, try to get GMOs out of your diet. No antibiotics, no irradiation, no synthetic growth hormones. Pesticides and fertilizers are made mostly from petroleum, from petrochemicals. So they're a huge contributor to global warming, in addition to all of that. So why do we want to eat organic? Why spend more money on organic? First of all, it's better for your health because all of those chemicals, they're not good for us. And there hasn't been a lot of research into what they do to our bodies. We know that short-term, high-dose exposure can make you very, very sick or kill you. There haven't been a lot of studies determining what long-term, low-dose does to us. And we seem to assume that conventional farming, which is not organic, is conventional, we seem to assume that that's what's normal, but that's not what's normal. That's only been around for the past 80 to 100 years. So I want to show you two apples. They're different varieties, and they both look exactly alike. This one, I have my glasses. Does that one start with a 9? Okay, so anything that starts with a 9 and it has 5 numbers is organic. So if you go to the grocery store and you don't know, you can't tell, you're not really sure, the signs aren't there, they should always have that little sticker. Anything that starts with a 9 and has 5 numbers is organic. Anything that has 4 numbers is not organic. The organic costs more, but it always says organic apples, organic zucchini, organic, and this is something that's one of my pet peeves. When you buy conventional, it doesn't say conventional zucchini or conventional apples. Yeah, it doesn't say pesticide-laden zucchini. So we seem to think it's giving us the idea that organic is other and conventional is the normal. That's not really the case. And it has environmental effects. And like I said, first of all, it's involved with global warming. But second of all, it contaminates groundwater. It's just a bad deal for us. It kills insects. It kills the animals that feed off of the insects. It's hurting the farm workers. It's just not a good deal for us. So also, soils that are organic, like I said, it's all about taking care of your soil, replenishing the soil. Organic soils act like a carbon sink. I imagine it, the way I envision it is that it's a great big sponge, a good, healthy, brand new sponge that you can squeeze, and it sucks in a lot of water. It's sucking in a lot of CO2. With soils, this is a guy, Ratan Lal, he's at the Ohio State University, which is a land-grant university. They do a lot of work on soils. And this one right here, people tend to think of organic farming methods as sort of the hippie, back to the farm methods. They don't take it seriously. But the USDA is starting to pay more and more attention to organic farming because we, the consumers, are demanding it. We are asking for organic. This is not something that the USDA planned. Same with farmers markets. So organic soils have been found to be much more resilient in times of drought or times of extreme rain. Why? Because they're healthier. And conventional farming is a major source of nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a powerful greenhouse gas. It's 300 times more powerful than CO2. It's very effective at holding heat in the planet. And the main source, synthetic fertilizers. So why is it more expensive? It's more time and labor intensive. It requires more more knowledge of pests and crops. So with conventional farming, you tend to buy the seed, and at so many weeks you spray the fertilizer. So many weeks after that, it's sort of a rote system. Whereas organic farming is much more labor intensive. I was talking to a woman who she and her husband ran a heirloom tomato organic farm and, you know, further west. And she said the type of tomatoes that you grow for conventional farming are tomatoes that transport easily, that keep a long time, whereas the kinds of tomatoes that are heirloom are tomatoes that they're much more delicate. So when you get produce that is organic, you're getting something that's probably not your typical conventional produce. And you pay for the true cost of growing that food. When you buy something that's organic, you're paying the farmer what it costs them to buy that food. They're not getting help from the USDA. Very, very little money from the USDA goes to organic farming. Most of it goes to commodity crops. So this is just a little something. This is the only planet in our solar system that has this tiny layer of topsoil upon which all of life on the surface of the planet depends. Did you know that? Had you ever heard that? If it weren't for soil, there would be no trees. There would be no animals that depend on trees. There would be no plants. I mean, we wouldn't be here, right? We would have animals in the ocean, but not on the surface of the planet. So we have to take care of our soil, and organic farming is the first way to do it. I work at Whole Foods. Whole Foods is the only certified organic grocery store chain in the country. And we have to have a certain method for storing all of our fruit. All of the organic has to be on top. When we display produce, organic and conventional cannot touch unless one of them is packaged, so they cannot touch. When we wash our cutting boards and knives and all that sort of stuff, after we disinfect them, we have to wash them again and get all of the chemicals off of it. And we have an organization that comes in and tests us every year. So we all have to get trained on all those methods. I never knew that about Whole Foods until I started working there. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. And all of these folks will be out in Commons Room to discuss their topics with you one-on-one. We are a little behind, so I think that we, rather than doing questions and answers, we are going to allow people to check in with you in Commons 1, and we'll invite our next panel up. But I want to thank you so much for that overview of thinking about our environment and all the environmental services that it provides for us, including sequestering carbon, growing our food, beautiful native landscaping. So thank you for coming, and we'll move on to our next panel. We're going to take a minute to get these guys set up, and then we'll be proceeding in about 5 minutes. We're ready to go? Okay. Yeah, just a second.
Well, anyway, it's not the ideal place to produce. If you really wanted to reduce your water, you could get some blueberries, you could just open the garden, right in the middle, and then that would be easy to serve in a cave. Yeah, I thought Wilson's sounds good.
Right now, there's,
Edible pods. Yeah, when they first come out and they're green and pliable, they're edible. Yeah, for humans. Yeah, for humans. Yeah. Yeah, still doing it.
So we just made the announcement in Commons 1, and that people will be coming in during this fine talk about what we can do to change things locally. And I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves as they start their talk. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Joe Pato, and I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen here in Lexington. So welcome to this session. I'm going to just kick things off and give a little bit of history because Lexington is deeply steeped in history, and we seem to care for it and our place in it. Those of you who attended this previous panel session saw that citizen participation, including our youngest members, are part of what makes things work. And I'll stress that what I'm going to introduce is what we're doing somewhat more organizationally, but things work because of your participation and interest. So just briefly on history, and I'm not going to go back beyond this millennium. We've focused on things like building. So in 2005, the town of Lexington adopted the LEED standard for all of its future buildings. A few years later, in 2010, we adopted the stretch code. We were one of 5 communities in Massachusetts, the first 5, to adopt that as a program to create better buildings than we otherwise would need to by code. And we've continued to update and evolve our building standards. And we're in the middle of, right now, creating a new generation of our building policy for all of our commercial buildings. We've also worried about process. So after many years at town meeting, we developed a Sustainable Lexington Committee, and there are several members here who are on that committee, to look at our climate and sustainable action plan for the community. And creating that plan was one of the key things we wanted to go forward with. We have a Better Buildings program, which was a community outreach program that yielded lots of, about 20% of homeowners, upgrading their insulation and ventilation, HC systems, and heating systems throughout town. We adopted in 2013 a Lexington climate change warrant article unanimously. The young girls who were here, or at least their video this morning, you could see town meeting responding to that need. And the Sustainable Lexington Committee has been developing guidelines for how to proceed in our decisions. And perhaps most importantly, we've developed a reusable task force model to be effective in solving some problems and moving forward. So just a few of those task force related activities: renewable energy. We created a solar task force, and from that we installed 1.1 megawatts on municipal rooftops of solar panel collection. We're in the process of installing a 2.2 megawatt facility out on Hartwell Avenue at the old landfill, ground mount and canopy mounted. And Solarize Lexington, which was a program that reached out to individual residents, yielded 1.1 megawatts of installed rooftop solar panels, doubling residential solar in the community. We're expecting to move to a community aggregation power contract for those who are on the basic plan. And we're hoping that Lexington will be the first community to adopt an all renewable power source at a price point that's cheaper than the basic utility service. We've gotten town meeting to fund a Getting to Net Zero task force with the goal of, by 2025, achieving net zero throughout the community as an aggregate. And we installed electric vehicle power stations in the center parking lot. It's not just what we do for these kinds of programs. We're also looking at local environmental issues in the environment we all occupy. We purchased Lusa Farm and have participated in organic farming that you might have just heard. We've started a composting program throughout the town schools, and one of the previous speakers spoke about how local residents can join that program for pickup for their own food wastes. We're in the process of developing a toxics reduction program. We are actively engaged with National Grid to reduce gas leaks and replace leak-prone pipes. In fact, in front of my house, that stretch of Mass Ave is getting new gas pipes. And we've developed a lot of conservation land and walkways throughout the community. You'll hear about several of these throughout this panel session, so thank you for coming. And Mark, I think you're next.
Thank you. I'm Mark Sandine, Chair of Sustainable Lexington. And Sustainable Lexington put together, has developed a sustainable action plan with to improve Lexington's health, sustainability, and resilience, with the overall goal of improving the quality of life and desirability of living in Lexington. We focus on two primary ways of doing that. The first is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and our exposure to toxics and hazardous chemicals in the town, with the goal of getting to net zero emissions over the next 25 years. The second major focus that we have is to develop the infrastructure that we need the resilient infrastructure we need to address future challenges from extreme storms and other challenges that are coming down and maximize our community well-being. Again, the long-term goal there is that we would like to have resilient infrastructure that would allow us to maintain essential services within the town in the event that there's an extreme storm that takes power out for up to 5 or 10 days. And the reason we're doing this is because, as other people have said earlier, climate change is here, it's now. The Northeast is particularly affected by climate change. What we see is that we're seeing more extreme storms in the Northeast than anywhere else in the United States, and we would expect over the next 25 to 50 years to see the climate in Massachusetts move to Virginia or South Carolina, depending on how things go. That means something on the order of 65 days over 90 degrees a year. That means something like 24 days over 100 degrees a year. So there are really important reasons for planning for the future. And as we plan for the future, we think about our resilience priorities. When you're going out into the wild, people will train you on what you need to think about in terms of survival. You can survive 3 minutes without air. You can survive 3 hours without shelter in extreme heat or cold. You can survive 3 days without water. You can survive 3 weeks without food. So as we put together our resilient planning for the town of Lexington, we take that into account. We want to see good indoor air quality in our buildings. We want to be able to breathe as we walk down the streets from having fewer pollution from burning fossil fuels. And we'd like to see that we have shelter in the event of extreme heat and cold, and food and water when our power goes out. And that's what we've determined as our primary vulnerabilities in Lexington is flooding, power outages, and toxic contamination as a result of extreme storms and the need for shelter in the event of these storms. The other priorities that we take a look at is how can we reduce our emissions. And it's really pretty interesting when you look at our buildings. Our buildings use most of the electricity in town, and our buildings use all the heat. It turns out 66% of our emissions come from our buildings. And so when Sustainable Lexington looks at how do we put a plan together, we look at our top priorities, and that means electricity in our buildings are our top priorities, followed by transportation, food, and waste. And Joe mentioned that we are working on a community choice aggregation program, which we hope will be approved in the next 2 or 3 weeks by the Department of Public Utilities, and we expect that this will roll out in the January-February timeframe of this year. The idea is that our long-term goal is to get to 100% renewable electricity for all the residents of the town of Lexington at a lower price than you're currently paying to Eversource for your electricity. And we hope that that's possible. Our consultants are telling us they believe it is. And here's a picture of Hurricane Irene in Lexington, and the snow October in Lexington, where we've had extended outages due to extreme storms over the past couple of years. And so what we're looking at is how do we enhance our electricity grid so that we can put more on-site renewables, put more distributed generation, and have a more reliable electricity grid so we're not suffering from these outages over time. From a better buildings perspective, as I mentioned, 66% of our emissions come from our buildings. The number one way to reduce our emissions is to have more efficient energy, more efficient buildings. And so there's a number of different programs we put together in the Better Buildings program to help residents and businesses in town adopt energy efficiency measures. And as we mentioned, if we can move our source of electricity to be 100% renewable, and we start to move our furnaces and our boilers from burning fossil fuels to electric heat pumps, and we hook up our electric cars, all that means is something on the order of 87% of our emissions could be eliminated just with those 3 primary steps. From a transportation perspective, we're supporting, as we said, the promotion of electric vehicles, public transportation, walking and biking in town, car sharing, and other alternative transportation systems. And we've talked a lot about food already in the morning. We won't spend a lot more on this, but like Lex Farm and the farmers market, we see that there's tremendous value in growing our own food sustainably and providing channels in order to make that available to Lexington residents, and at the end of that cycle to compost that food. And that's about 10% of our emissions. Finally, we want to look at health. When we're doing the Sustainable Action Plan, it's all about the health of the people in the town of Lexington. And that means indoor air quality. We spend probably 90% of our time inside these days. And so when we design our buildings, we want to design our buildings in such a way that we are breathing healthy air inside of our buildings. And one of the best ways to do that is to reduce the amount of toxics and hazardous substances that we use in the building, in the construction of our buildings and in the operation of our buildings. Finally, when we're spending some time on how do we store dangerous substances, so in the event of an extreme storm or a disruption in some way, shape, or form, that those substances are secured and they don't get released into the atmosphere. So finally, of course, we want to be reducing waste. So that's the Sustainable Action Plan in a just sort of nutshell. We look at 10 different sectors. I gave you a little bit of a view of 5 of those sectors today, and that's what we had to talk about in terms of our Sustainable Action Plan. And I'll turn it over to Sean right now, who's going to be talking about our buildings.
Good morning. My name is Sean Newell. I'm the Assistant Director of the Department of Public Facilities. I'm also on the Selectmen's Energy Conservation Committee. Just want to give you a brief overview of the department and then get on to where we've been in the past with our buildings and how we've moved forward with the designs. So, Department of Public Facilities, is responsible for all the operations and maintenance of the buildings, both town and school. We also have a capital program that we run through the town. We have project managers that handle those town buildings and clerk of the works. We do all the planning of town buildings with the permanent building committee, and we run a lot of 5-year capital plans, 10-year capital plans. So too much about that. These are kind of the top staff within the department. You have Patrick Gordon, who's the Director of Public Facilities. He's very more out in front of the department than I am. I'm kind of the back scenes kind of guy, trying to get it all done. There's myself and there's Mark Barrett, the project manager. Mark is a is an architect by trade, but he handles all the building for both town and schools. Just to give you an overview of the kind of people that are in the department that support you know, the school buildings and the town buildings. These are the kind of people that are, again, behind the scenes. These are all custodial and maintenance workers, along with administration. We usually have a meeting every summer. We do a lot of focus groups within the department to figure out how we can continuously improve what we do within the department. So I just wanted to show you the people that are kind of doing it. The past practices in building construction from about 2009 to 2013, I started here in 2006. This is actually my 10th year here in the town. So my push along with Pat in the department was looking at building automation, how do we control buildings, how do we create the best comfort, how do we create the best educational environment. So it was building automation, doing a lot of energy monitoring, looking at software, how the software was running in the buildings, whether we were doing it right at that point in time, and changing that. And I think we ended up saving a lot of money during that time on energy. A lot of the things, looking at schedules, the schedules that we were putting in the building, the actual schedules that the building are being used. When I first came here, we had equipment that was running continually 24/7, and looking at the scheduling and who was doing the scheduling, were they doing it right. So now we have building automation. We're actually starting to put in analytics that will tell us that the buildings are running when they shouldn't be running, and giving us alarms to let us know to respond to it so they're not running continually. Looking at how buildings are zoned. Buildings used to, when I first started here, you turn the whole building on and shut the whole building off. And because of the way the buildings are being used by town and schools, we figured that we could zone certain areas of the building to schedules, saving a lot of money with just zoning the areas that are being used. And then a lot of oil to gas conversions. Currently, I want to make sure I'm right with this fact, is that all school and town buildings are now on gas. Nothing runs on oil in this town anymore. So here's one of the buildings. This is Fisk Elementary School. This is kind of the first building that I came into, and trying to change what we were looking at. This is a screen that was created back in probably about 2006 to show gas consumption, electric consumption of the building, so we could watch how that building was running on a monthly basis, comparing it to the bills to make sure that we were trending like we should be trending within those buildings. Fisk, so a lot of building automation. Right now, the only buildings that do not have automation are the Hastings and the Central Administration Building, a portion of it, and we're looking to change those buildings to have automation. So here's some projects that we've done, so just get a visual on it, kind of a before and after. You know, these are old CFL lightings that you'll see in most ceiling grids. And then as we've changed them, you can see that we're putting in LED lighting. So the look of the lighting has changed, but the intensity hasn't. Gives you the same color that people look for in educational spaces. Here's an old boiler room running on oil, and then changing it over to condensing boilers. So you can see the size of the boiler room's changed. It's clean, creating a better heat for the building at a lower cost. Here's a domestic hot water tank, if you know what the older ones used to look like. This tank here now runs a whole building. In the past, it would be 2 of them as a redundancy. We don't need that anymore. Another gas conversion from oil to gas conversion at Hastings. And then we get on to kind of the middle ground. Big foaming renovations is where we started to look at the air that we were bringing into the building. Were we bringing enough air? Was it a healthy air? We ended up putting in 100% outside air units. The building used to take in 10% air through the schoolhouse unit ventilators. Hopefully I'm not getting too technical. We are now bringing it into 100% outside air units on the roof, and we're conditioning that air as it comes into the building. So we're either cooling it or dropping out the humidity during a cooling day, or during a heating day, it's heating that air stream up to heat the classroom. And in this regard, there's baseboard on the window wall to heat the room up. So then as we move forward, I didn't put that spin in there. No, I don't have to condense it down. So the new Estabrook is really the type of systems that we're going to be putting in buildings. This has been after that building was completed, a lot of residents got together, Sustainable Lexington, NG Conservation Committee, Permanent Building Committee, to look at the design of buildings and where we make designing our buildings to be healthy, where we design to be energy efficient, resilient, and sustainable. So as we move forward, this is kind of the system that is currently in the bridge in the Bowman, but it's also a portion of the Estabrook, Diamond and Clark renovations. That this is a typical ERU or ERV, energy recovery ventilation. Basically what you're doing is your exhaust stream is heating up or cooling down your outside airstream, and then it either gets cooled or heat through either cooling coils or heating coils, and then that becomes the ventilation air into most of the building spaces for Estabrook, Diamond, and Clark, and this is kind of a system that we'll start moving forward with. So as we're moving forward, we got a bunch of people together and we called the program, had so many different names, Green Buildings, Better Buildings. So anyways, with the design, we're trying to move forward with what type of recommendations will we move forward. So the priority that everybody came up with was an acronym called HERS, Health, Energy, Resiliency, Sustainability. So the current buildings, we've got the HER portion covered. The S we're still working on. The H is for health. So are we looking at indoor air quality? Are we taking in 100% outdoor air with all of our designs that we're moving forward with? And with the system that I just showed you, what we get out of that is we do get 100% outdoor air. We have sound reduction in the rooms from older systems. We've moved those sound levels down below 35 dB. This room right here is an air system, but it's probably running at about 38, 39 dB. So these newer classrooms that you're walking into, you can't even hear this air. So if you can hear the air that's moving right now, in those buildings, you won't hear anything. So from a IEP for students, 504 for students, it's very good for hearing impaired students. And not only the hearing impaired students, but all students when a teacher's trying to have a discussion with them for them to hear the teacher actually talking. The energy portion of it, all the buildings that we're currently building right now that we're putting structural steel in, the rooftops will handle solar. So we don't put solar into the projects right now, but we make the rooftops strong enough to handle solar if we were to move forward with solar. So just wanted you to understand that. These are some numbers that we had run on the Estabrook. So this is a comparison of the old Estabrook to the new Estabrook. So the new Estabrook is much larger than the old Estabrook, but by per square foot value, we are 47% of the BTU to the older building. So the older building using much more energy than the current square foot of the new Estabrook. The cost per square foot, 29% reduction per square foot. And the emissions, of course, 68% that of the older building. You have a building that runs on natural gas now as opposed to fossil fuel. It ran on oil for a certain portion of town just before that project went off. And again, the sound levels are actually below 35 dB at the Estabrook. They will be below 35 dB at the Diamond Middle School, which is getting an addition with a full renovation of the main building. And then at the Clark Middle School, it will be at the part of the additional portion. The resiliency, it would be the ability of the building to adapt to the climate change. So all of the buildings that we're moving forward with have air conditioning. So as Mark talked about, as climate change happens, that during the months of June, September, and October, when we have classes in session, we now have air conditioning to be able to handle if those warm days actually start to come into play. So that's a little bit of the resiliency portion of it. So just a quick overview. This is the Clark Middle School renovation. That yellow portion is the portion that will get a induction system. The main building of the Clark was renovated back in 2011, where they did a replacing kind unit ventilators, but they got away from actually using electric heat pumps, which were, they were beyond their useful life cycle at that point in time. And then, of course, the Diamond Middle School, not only is the addition, this yellow portion, sorry I don't have a laser pointer, but there's not only the yellow portions are being added onto the building, but the main part of the building here is also getting all new systems put into it, which would be the induction systems. So, there are other topics that came up during those conversations is enhanced commissioning for all new construction. In the past, a commissioning agent would come in and just look at the closeout of the project. Now we have an enhanced commissioning where the commissioning agent is involved right from the start of the building to make sure that the engineer and the architect are writing the specifications to what we want, whether it's building materials, the right type of mechanical systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems, building envelope is all done up front of the building and not at the end. And that's what used to happen when we do a lot of commissioning at the end of the building project, but now we do it throughout the building project. Another question was optimizing energy performance. So new construction, are we going to do 30% better? Are we going to do LEED silver? Are we going to build them to a LEED platinum and then value engineer some stuff down, but never fall below a LEED silver building? Those are the kind of things that are out there. Net zero started to come into place, better building, living challenge. These are all topics that we're still discussing. Renewable energy purchases versus on-site generation. So do we go with solar on roofs or do we buy solar renewable energy? And as Mark just said, that looks like the way the town is starting to move. Low VOC products, basically the building materials when you go to the LEED silver and the LEED gold. A lot of those building projects, so your wall board, your countertops, the type of glues, the type of materials that are being used, the type of paints that are being used are all now being looked at as we go forward with newer buildings. So these are kind of policy considerations that as we move forward and have conversations throughout the town is, are we looking at demand response? Are we air conditioning all of our buildings? What renewable options do we look at? Do we look at solar? Do we look at wind? Do we look at digesters? Energy storage? Building standards? Do we go at LEED platinum, net zero, living building challenge? Do we look at it from a life cycle? Do we look at it from a cost for a more resilient building like a net zero building? And is there really an extra cost to build a net zero building as opposed to the type of buildings that we're building? Now we're on to Dan Voss.
I have a tendency to talk long, so Mark's gonna give me the high side. So I'm going to chat about the solar project. I'm with Mark on Sustainable Lexington, and I chaired the solar task force. It kicked off, I think, in 2012, looking at 2013, and started with the kids you heard from earlier, changing the law so we could pop solar or at least solar power purchase agreements, so we could execute solar power purchase agreements in town, which allowed us to pursue these projects. But I want to make a point. When Mark went through the areas of the climate action plan, each of those areas right now, the great news for Lexington is that in each of those areas we have an embarrassing number of initiatives that we could pursue that we would call low-hanging fruit that make economic sense immediately for the town. So we're not in this era now where you can choose to be forward-thinking and sustainable or choose to do what's economically right. We're at the point now with the technology and with all these smart folks out there thinking of ways to do things better, that all you have to do is ask the question, is there a different way for us to pursue this particular piece of work, this particular building, and you'll more than likely find ways of improving these buildings, improving the way we run the town, and at the same time, save money, make money for the town. So solar is a great example of that. Where back in 2012, we took another look at this. We had looked at it previously, and we said there's absolutely no reason we shouldn't be pursuing solar, because for the town, it will cost us nothing. It will save us cost, in fact, make money for us, and over the long term contribute to a more sustainable Lexington. So following the great effort by the girls back in 2012 to get the law changed, we engaged in a process with a series of vendors to look at town buildings and other open spaces in town and determine how much solar we could put in. And we started with the schools, partnering with Mr. Newell, with Sean. And yeah, really happy to say that at this point we have 1.1 megawatts across six of the town buildings, 5 schools, and Carey Library. The expected savings from those installations is $6 million. Cost the town not a dollar, not a cent. Cost us some time, but we're happy to do it, you know. And the health benefits, which are increasingly being factored into the economic equation, certainly in the federal government and in the state government, the way they look at investments. You know, 800,000 to 2.9 million. That's thinking about the avoided cost of displacing that fossil fuel energy. Okay. Who knows? Anyone know what building that is? Come on. Which building is that? Carey Library, right? You can put solar on Carey Library and get it through the Historic District Commission. That's really kind of, that's pretty massive, don't you think? So we have solar on top of Carey Library because you can't see it. And it's up there producing energy for us, right? And they were happy to support it. So here are the buildings that were installed on, from the high school all the way through to Carey Library. I want to make the point here that this was a first step. Right, so Diamond and School, we're completing renovations on. We should be looking at every building we're opening up, every building in town, every new building we construct, as Sean said, and saying, how do we make it solar ready, or better still, and this is what we are looking at, how do we integrate solar into it on day one? But we have plenty more landscape on our rooftops to increase our solar production in town, and we'll continue to pursue that. And we've now proven that it's economically viable. Yeah. Anyone know what school that is? I guess? No. Okay.
Harrington, she got it.
Harrington, yeah. Harrington School. So once again, no one knows it's there, producing energy for the town, easy to do, and we have partners out there in industry who are happy to do it with us. Zero cost to the town. So these systems were up and running by the end of 2015. And anyone can go online and actually check out the performance of the systems. We're not going to do it here, but you can see how much energy we're producing for the town day in, day out. I think, in fact, we're exceeding projections.
Yeah, so just to let you know, if you look at the top of the screen, there might be an IP address or a web address you can actually go to, type it in home, and actually see what the school is producing.
Yeah, and I'm already at 5 minutes. That's unbelievable. Okay, well, I'll scoot through the next ones. So we started with the schools. We went to Hartwell Avenue. We looked at that facility, and this is an example of asking the question, can we do things a bit smarter? And we did not want to sacrifice what we were already doing out there in terms of composting, but we thought we could get some good energy out of that site. So we're in the middle of constructing 2.2 megawatts right now. It's really cool. There's a ground mount. So solar panels on the ground. We introduced some new machinery, so we actually increased the amount of composting we can do on the site. So we're doing more composting than we were before. We've put a ground mount on. We've got a canopy over where you drop off your hazardous waste. Okay, we're building a canopy.
Where can we see this when we go to dump the landfill?
The composting facility. Yeah,
You just drive in and
you're going to see it everywhere. So when you drop off your garden waste, you're going to have a canopy over you. When you drop off your hazardous waste, you've got a solar canopy over the top. And to do both of those things, you're probably going to drive past the ground mount. So they're constructing it right now. And you'll see it along the bike path. You won't get the black flies anymore when you get on the bike path. Okay, that's a little picture of the array. So this is the ground mount here. Okay, here's the solar canopy over the hazardous waste drop-off area. Here's the solar canopy so that you don't get too wet when you're dropping off garden waste. Hartwell Avenue is up here.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're driving in, right, up, and there's the bike path going down there. So that's where all the black flies used to come from. You won't get them anymore. Yeah. Well, that's a promise. Yeah. They might actually be coming from the wetland. So this is just the construction activity. This is 2 weeks ago, the area where we're going to be putting up the solar canopy. Now we're taking down the, what we call the sail canopy that was already up there. And this is the racking going in place for the ground mount. So that's actually what's happening out there right now. Once again, I said we didn't detract from the site. We increased the value of the existing activities there by thinking about how it was being done and doing it smarter. And just in summary, the way these deals are done, the town contracts with a vendor. We don't spend any money. They build it, they own it, they operate it, and they basically sell the power to us at a reduced rate. And that's how we make the money. In aggregate, over the next 20 years, or 25 years, it'll save the town about $21 million. And be huge for the environment. And that's it for me. Close enough, right? Short took long.
Hi, hello. My name is Lisa Fitzgibbons from Mothers Out Front, Lexington, and I'd like to thank Marcia and Ricky and Lex GWAC for organizing this event and for inviting Mothers Out Front to speak. Mothers Out Front is building a movement of mothers, grandmothers, and caregivers committed to ensuring a livable planet for our kids. We do have a table outside, and we hope that you'll come find out more about our organization and our grassroots campaigns. What kind of planet do we want to leave our children? Actions that we take or fail to take today will determine the kind of world and the challenges that they face in 20, 50, or 100 years. Confronting climate change is going to require actions at every level of society, including the local action. In Lexington, I am proud to say we are taking responsibility for our emissions, and we are tackling the biggest source of those greenhouse gas emissions, our buildings. As Mark said earlier, 66% of the town's emissions come from our buildings. We are exploring a goal of net zero emissions from our built environment. And what that means is that we will work to reduce the net annual greenhouse gas emissions that we produce in Lexington as a community over the next 25 years. The scope of this emissions, the scope of this goal, it's for the community at large. That means that no individual house needs to be net zero, nor does it need to produce all the energy that it consumes. It considers only the emissions produced from operating our buildings, not the emissions that are produced in constructing those buildings. And it is a 25 to 35-year plan. So it allows us to address the easiest targets first and plan for the more challenging ones. We are lucky in that we follow a vanguard of communities that are tackling this problem. And the principles that they follow in targeting net zero emissions are they report their emissions, because you can't reduce what you don't measure. They reduce those emissions through energy conservation and efficiency. They produce renewable energy on and off-site, and they purchase renewable energy from third parties. And only as necessary will they purchase offsets or credits until a full transition to renewable energy is possible. Yep. Again, we follow communities who have set a path for us to follow in pursuing net zero. And what those communities have done is they put together a task force of diverse stakeholders and subject matter experts. They take them through a rigorous planning process and they support them with expert advice. Lexington plans to do the same. Actually, let me just go back. Our task force is an ad hoc town task force. All members will be approved by our Board of Selectmen. They will report out to the Board of Selectmen, and we're thinking that the time would be they would do this work in 12 to 18 months. Here are a list of stakeholders. This list of stakeholders was developed with our Board of Selectmen and Sustainable Lexington. It's important that we have all the key areas who have a stake in our building environment, because we need to negotiate a deal to get to net zero with all of them. Beyond the task force, we will have, the task force will in turn have working groups, and these are the working groups that Cambridge had, but the point of the working groups is to get a set of people who are devoted to a particular area and are researching and feeding information back up to the task force. So the areas: energy supply and alternatives, regulation policy, financing and incentives, and education and engagement and behavioral change for the community at large. The rigorous process we would take people, this task force through, includes baseline research, understanding the emissions from our current building types now in town, tools and technical things, best practices in town, and energy supply primers, so we understand all the alternatives for energy supply in town. There are tools that experts can bring, consultants can bring, where we can model the impact that certain policies or changes will have, so that we know that we're putting in measures that have the biggest impact on our emissions. Facilitation, again, really, really important to get agreements. An action plan, community engagement, hopefully adoption and implementation. The deliverables will be comprehensive, they will be practical, they will be implementable, and they will be in line with a sustainable future. This is an example of the deliverables. This is Cambridge's Net Action Plan, and although you can't read the fine print, these are policy and regulatory and energy supply changes, building code changes, etc. on the left. And on the right, you see a timeline that includes things for study, pilot programs, and implementation. We believe that we can do this work in Lexington in 12 months for probably $100,000. We went to town meeting, and because of budgetary constraints, town meeting gave us $40,000 last year, with the understanding that we would come again for another $40,000 next year, and the remainder after that. So we are now working with that time frame. We hope to do this in 12 to 18 months over several financial years. Where we are in the process now is that we have hired a consultant to help us with understand our building emissions, our baseline building emissions. Now we are in conversations with other consultants and are working on an RFP to help with facilitation and strategy and process. And we are recruiting for the task force and also for the working groups. So if you are have expertise or have a particular interest in this, please feel free to contact me and let me know, or contact Mark Sandine. Thank you.
So I'm happy to take questions from the audience now.
So you talked about the amount of energy that you're producing from solar. Do you have any sense for how much energy just town-wide or in general is being consumed against how much you're producing? Is that something you're trying to track against?
Yes. Yeah, so the level of energy we're producing, not the capacity, but the level of energy we're producing from the solar we've installed represents about an offset of about 45% of the energy that the municipality, the town, uses. So that gives you some sense of scale. I mean, with solar, because it operates when the sun shines, if you install a megawatt of solar, it's probably somewhere between 100 and 200 homes as an equivalent offset. That's one way of thinking about it. But in terms of the town investing in solar, its investment is basically offsetting about 45% on a kilowatt hour basis of the energy that the town actually uses.
And is the goal to get to 100%, or is it?
Well, I think as part of getting to net zero, the goal would be to, exactly offsetting 100% of our electricity consumption with renewable resources. Why not more? Right? They've got programs like community solar and others that continue to be developed that would allow us to take municipal assets and actually provide them as inputs into certain community solutions as well. So.
A really exciting thing at the Board of Selectmen's meeting a couple of weeks ago, Mass DOT proposed to put solar on the noise barriers along the north side of 128. You may have seen that. That would be about 9% of our town's municipal electricity.
And I think a first.
Right, yes. It would be the first in the country, first in the Western Hemisphere, they said, that actually putting solar on the noise barriers. This is done very commonly in Europe right now, so there's a lot of expertise and experience doing that. But we would hope that, what did they say? The consultant said maybe this would be a shot heard around the world.
The first blot.
Are there any metrics in terms of how Lexington compares to other towns in the state and the nation vis-a-vis the work that you're doing? And if there are, how is Lexington learning from other towns, or how is Lexington, if it's at the forefront, leading other towns or helping other towns?
So they're throwing it to me. So it's both. We are following communities like Cambridge in developing a net zero task force, so we are learning from their experience and experience from a community in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, Fort Collins, Colorado.
Right. So we are following. We were not the first community to install ground-mounted solar. There are quite a few communities that have used their landfills, former dump sites. We fortunately got in before the end of the opportunity to do so under the current state incentive programs by an hour, quite literally. It was the last day, and there was a little bit of a question on the filing that needed to be cleaned up. And we are working with other communities to share our best practices, having a forum like this one for community outreach to both engage residents and to provide the opportunity to get you to participate and to learn about how we're going forward. Lisa, are there more that you'd like to?
Well, just that Mothers Out Front is working on pushing net zero in Concord as well, and Concord is a little behind us because they have their own municipal light and power plant, but they are very interested, and based on our citizens warrant last year, proposing net zero for the town, that Mothers Out Front was proposing, the Board of Selectmen there decided to start a task force, an energy futures task force, that would consider all of these things, including the future of the light plant in Concord. So we are definitely trying to, through organizations, trying to make this a regional effort as well as a local effort, what we're doing.
And the part of the question that I avoided was the metrics. Essentially, this is still a relatively young process nationwide, so we haven't established metrics to compare against, but that would be something I'd expect to have emerge.
But I have some metrics.
But Mark has metrics.
Always.
Joe mentioned we weren't the first to go solar, but when we did complete our rooftop solar project, it's the second largest municipal rooftop project in the state of Massachusetts. And where's Marcia? There's Marcia. Marcia ran with Fran Ludwig, the Solarized Lexington program, and at that time we got something like 1.1 megawatts worth of solar on our residential rooftops, and that turned out to be the second most of any town in the Commonwealth as well. So it turns out that when you combine those two things together, we're number one.
The question at the back.
I kind of noticed the Edison substation in Lexington Center there. They had 5 transformers there. That's now at 3. Are they shuffling grid stuff around to balance the loads and the demands and the supplies? You know anything about that?
So we don't have information to comment on that today. Thanks. In the back.
You mentioned getting residents involved, and I was just wondering if you could speak more to how residents can get involved, and if you have information on individuals doing things like putting solar on their homes.
So 3 answers. There is the Sustainable Lexington Committee that looks at all of these issues, and they're always looking for new members, and we're happy to expand the charter to allow additional voting members. Mark is the chair. Speak with him afterwards. There are private groups like Mothers Out Front, who I think would appreciate having engagement. There is the Getting to Net Zero Task Force, which is currently being recruited, and as I think Lisa pointed out, they're mail to her if you have interest. And there is GWAC right behind me, without a URL. Oh no, a big URL. So reach out to those. Come speak to any of us after this session, and we'll get you connected.
Just to add to that, there are also parent groups in the schools. All the schools are developing green teams or sustainability teams for people who have children in the school system. The Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition has been active for many years and is always welcoming new active members. And there are a number of panels in the other room where the tables are, different organizations, both local and statewide, that you can find to get involved with. But feel free to also just to contact me while we're walking around. I really want to hang on just a second.
And one more answer is come back at 1 o'clock. We're going to have 4 outstanding organizations who are making a difference at the state level. So you can come back and find out how those organizations are working.
That's an excellent plug. I think the afternoon speakers will be very exciting. If you have another question.
Quick question. You've been talking more about town buildings. What about privately owned buildings, condominium developments, and anything? Is there any concessions that the town is prepared to offer when it comes to that?
Well, just as one point, I mean, one item that we recently voted on in Sustainable Lexington that would be relevant, thinking about commercial buildings, is encouraging a PACE program, for instance, within the town, which would be a way for the town to sort of amortize the cost of energy improvements over multiple years for commercial building owners, rather than them having to pay for it up front. They pay for it, through their tax base. And so that's an example of how we're looking at the commercial space. And then the Getting to Net Zero Task Force, you saw the list up there of the folks that are involved, includes and seeks to include commercial building owners within town. So that this is really a matter of just communicating to folks the things that they can do and the business case that supports it. Because as I was saying before, there's just an embarrassment of low-hanging fruit when it comes to projects you can embark on that have an incredibly short payback. They're also very positive for the environment, and there's just an asymmetry of knowledge out there, and habits that we have to try and change. So yeah, Joe.
And just to expand on that, there has been some zoning relief allowing ground-mounted solar arrays in the commercial zone, I think pretty much Hartwell Avenue, and we have had programs like Solarize Lexington, which were town-sponsored in collaboration with both private groups and vendors to provide pricing incentives to residents and commercial entities to put solar panels on their roof.
So I want to thank everyone for coming to the local panel, and I want to thank our panelists so much for catching us up on what's going on in Lexington and what we can look forward to in the future, and what a difference we can all make in becoming a more sustainable Lexington. The next thing that we have, we're going to have a break in our speaking sessions, and there's going to be an electric car meetup in front of the Worden Road entrance to the high school. And so if anybody has interest in learning about electric cars, their owners will, including one of our panelists, Lisa Gibbons, will be there. Two of our panelists, there'll be Teslas and electric Golfs and a wide variety of interesting cars. Then we'll be meeting back here. There will be a talk at 12:30 on greening your investments. And then we start with the really wonderful panel. Carrie Emanuel will be speaking at 1. He's an expert on hurricanes, nationally known expert on hurricanes and their intensification due to climate change, and a Lexington resident that he won. And following that, we have an expert panel, and I'll let Mark tell you about that since he's going to be moderating that panel on what is going on in the state.
The 1:30 panel is Making a Difference in the Commonwealth, and you'll be hearing from Sierra Club Massachusetts on how they created solar supporters at the State House. You'll be hearing from 350 Massachusetts on how they eliminated the pipeline tax from Mothers Out Front, on how they've been plugging natural gas leaks, and from Climate Action Business Association, who's been focused on resilient adaptation in Massachusetts and won national awards for their efforts, including an award from the White House. So all these organizations have been incredibly successful, making a difference at the Massachusetts level over the last year, and they all have really exciting initiatives going forward that you might find interesting as well. With that, thank you very much for coming. Go learn how to drive an electric car.
Can you all hear me okay? No? My name is Charlie Moore, and I'm a member... volume, Charlie. Please volume. More? Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. All right. So I'm Charlie Moore. I'm a member of the Lexington Global Warming Action Coalition and Sustainable Middlesex. And it's great to see all of you here, and I'm particularly delighted that we have Dr. Carrie Emanuel with us, Lexington's own Dr. Carrie Emanuel. A little bit of background before I turn it over to him. Dr. Emanuel is a professor of atmospheric science at MIT. He is world-renowned for his work in studying hurricanes and understanding them, as well as understanding climate change. He's received too many awards for me to mention now, but I will say
that he was elected to the National Academy of Sciences in 2007. Dr. Emanuel has a long list of publications, but the one I would recommend to everyone here is his book entitled What We Know About Climate Change. Is that audio okay, or I'm hearing a little bit? It's too loud. Is that better? All right, that's much better. So I wanted to mention to people Dr. Emanuel's book, What We Know About Climate Change. The New York Times shares my enthusiasm for this book, which explains complex scientific principles in ways that a layperson can understand. It is objective, clear, and also explores solutions to the problems, as well as mentioning. It's a good book to share with a friend or a relative who doesn't understand what is happening to the Earth. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Curry Emanuel.
Thank you very much, Charlie. That's a very hard intro to live up to. But I'll try to entertain you today. Thank you for coming, and it's really great to be with all of you today. And can you hear me? I'm not very good with microphones, so can you hear me all right? A little bit closer. If I get too close, you'll hear only P's. Okay, I'll try that. If you in the back can't hear me, just wave, and I'll know what you mean by that. So I thought what I'd try to do today is to give you assuming that most of you are pretty familiar with this problem, or you wouldn't be here today. And so I'm not going to try to give you a whole climate tutorial, but kind of a little up-to-speed tutorial on where we're at in climate science, talk about what we have learned in science and other kinds of activities like economics about climate risks. Tell you a little bit about what our Defense Department thinks about all of this, which I think is very interesting and disturbing. And then go on to talk a little bit about where we go from here. What do we do about this? So here is a up-to-date record of global mean temperature from NASA. The red curve is sort of a smooth rendition of the annual values, which you see in the black lines. As you are probably aware, last year was the warmest year on record. Records going back about 150 years, although we have reasons to believe that it's a record going back much further than that. And that this year is likely to break last year's record. Of course, we don't know yet, but we're very much on track to do that. This continues a very dramatic correlation between carbon dioxide and temperature. So the red curve is also the global mean temperature going back to 1880 and ending up in 2015 is the last point on that curve. And the blue curve is a measure of the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere. Now, carbon dioxide isn't the only greenhouse gas that's increasing. Another important greenhouse gas that goes along with that is methane. In a very loose sense, the two have been rising about the same rate. That's not entirely true, but this gives you a pretty good idea. So that correlation is not based upon the latest computer models. This is one of the misconceptions a lot of people have about my field, is it's all based upon hopelessly complicated models. Believe me, if it were based on that, I wouldn't believe it either. It's based on simple physics. And it was predicted more than 100 years ago by this man, Svante Arrhenius, who is a Swedish chemist. And he wrote in 1906 that if we were to double the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere, we would increase the global mean surface temperature by 4 degrees. That's a remarkable prediction based upon rather incomplete measurements at that time. Given that the modern IPCC report, based upon much fancier models in physics, gives a range of 2 to 4.5 degrees. This guy did it with pencil and paper, and I'm not kidding you, measurements of moonlight. This is a great era for science. We could go out on nights with a full moon and make measurements and make progress. So we do know, since then, that Arrhenius' prediction that if we were to burn lots of fossil fuels, carbon dioxide would go up, got is absolutely incontrovertible. It has. This is a record of carbon dioxide going back to the year 900 AD. And based upon actual measurements at Hawaii since 1958, those are the black dots, and based upon analyzing bubbles of the atmosphere trapped in ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica, those are the colored dots. And you can see that there's quite a stable value of carbon dioxide, 280 parts per million, all the way from 900 until about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And that's what, that chart is old. One of the problems about giving this talk is I have to update this chart just about every time I give it. That's the update. That's where we are today, that star, okay? We just went past 400, right? Now let's take this out of the context of the last 1,000 years and put it in the context of the last 800,000 years, which we're able to do, again, thanks to the fact that bubbles of the atmosphere are trapped in ice cores and give us a record going back about that far. So the blue curve is the carbon dioxide concentration going back 800,000 years. The leftmost point is 800,000 years ago, and the star in the upper right is the current value of carbon dioxide. Okay? So you see that there are natural fluctuations that go hand in hand with glacial cycles. In fact, the red curve at the bottom is a temperature of Antarctica based on another kind of proxy in ice cores. And you can see that that tracks carbon dioxide. By the way, we don't think carbon dioxide caused the ice ages. In fact, we're quite sure it didn't. But it was an important feedback in controlling things like temperatures in the tropics back then. But the point is that modern analysis of proxies of carbon dioxide suggests that the values we have now we have not seen in at least 15 million years. Okay? 15 million years. When you push the system that hard and that fast, you've got to expect that you're taking something of a gamble. Now, 400 parts per million looks pretty spectacular on this chart, but wait till you see what's going to happen. These are projections, again, from the IPCC report going forward, so this is a little bit hard to see the scale. The left-hand side of this is the year 2000, and the right-hand side of this is the year 2100, and these curves are projections for the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere going forward. The red curve is assuming that economies, particularly in Asia and India, continue to expand, and that we do nothing to curb emissions. Then by the end of this century, we're at 1,250 parts per million. In other words, triple today's value, okay? Doubling of pre-industrial values is that blue horizontal dashed line. So we're unless we do something rather drastic, we will almost certainly double the carbon dioxide from pre-industrial values. Now, the problem with carbon dioxide, and methane doesn't have this problem, by the way, is that its residence time in the atmosphere is very long. So what you see on this chart is based upon models of the carbon cycle. And on the upper chart, which runs from the year 1800 to the year 3000, okay, we assume that we're just going to keep burning fossil fuels and putting carbon in the atmosphere, and then hypothetically we're going to turn off the emissions, just switch them off altogether. Of course, it's very unrealistic, just to see what happens. And you can see here that, you know, for example, if you turn it off when the CO2 content's 850 ppm, there's an initial rapid decline over the next couple of hundred years, but then it takes thousands of years for it to really decay, maybe 10,000 years for it to decay back to pre-industrial values. And the bottom chart, which you can't read the axis of, it's the same time period, is the temperature of the planet. And you can see that basically those lines are horizontal. In other words, the temperature you have when you turn off the emissions is the temperature you're stuck with for probably 5 to 10,000 years. Unless, of course, you can figure out how to pull CO2 artificially out of the atmosphere. There's a compensation because it takes a long time for the ocean to catch up to the atmosphere and its heat content. So heat is still coming out of the ocean at the same time that CO2 is decaying. That's why it all falls on the shoulders of the generation represented mostly in this room, us. Right? If we don't do something, or our kids at the very worst don't do something about this, we're stuck. with whatever the consequences might be for a very, very long time. And that's an important point to note. So let's turn from what we think is going to happen to a discussion of risks. You could say, and it's meaningful to say, well, so what? It gets a little bit warmer. There was a chart shown earlier that the climate in Massachusetts today might be what the climate of South Carolina is today at the end of the century. And maybe that's not so bad. A lot of people move from here to South Carolina. So why should we worry about that? What are the known risk factors? Well, one of them is, I think, fairly obvious, is sea level is going up. Okay, and I'll say a little bit more about that. It is going up. Its rate of rise is accelerating. There's an increasing hydrological cycle. This is actually something you don't need a big model to tell you. It's basic physics. As you warm the climate, you get more hydrological extremes. That means more floods, more very heavy rain events, and more drought. Increasing incidence of high category hurricanes. That's something I work on directly. And associated storm surges and freshwater floods and more heat stress. And this is something that is not, in my opinion, discussed enough. I know you can't see it in the back, and that is it's a real threat to marine ecology. And I'll sort of show you very briefly the evidence for that. So first, sea level. This is a curve going from the year 1880 to the present in blue, and then continuing on with these various different projections of emissions to the end of this century, and it's in feet. So if we don't do anything to stop CO2, the current projection is for about 3 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Now that may not sound like a lot, but 1 foot of sea level rise between the last century and now made the difference between whether Hurricane Sandy flooded Manhattan or not. In other words, if that same storm had occurred in 1912 rather than 2012, it probably wouldn't have flooded Manhattan. So what you worry about is not just the average sea level, you worry about the propensity of surges caused by big windstorms to flood cities. And that's what happened in Sandy. And that's what could easily happen here. So here is a picture of what a 1.5 meter storm surge would look like in Boston to overtop the Charles River Dam. And I don't know how well you can see this. It didn't come through all that well, but if you look at my university campus, MIT, in the background, you can see the whole campus is flooded. I'd have to take a canoe to get to I see some of my colleagues in the audience. We should get lifeboats and string them up off the top of our building. This is a possibility by the end of the century. More floods around the world, and we're beginning to see that in data. More drought. It sounds paradoxical, but that's what we expect. And more heat stress. So what we actually feel, as you probably are aware, is not the temperature itself, what our skin is sensitive to. Something called the wet bulb temperature, which is a function of both temperature and humidity. It's basically the lowest temperature you can cause a surface to reach by evaporating water from it. And we can't survive biologically with wet bulb temperatures over 35 degrees centigrade. Today's maximum is about 30 degrees around the world. This map shows progression of time from the current to the end of the century in a kind of a mild emissions scenario in the middle and full throttle emissions on the right. Wet bulb temperatures in the Middle East. And you can see around the Persian Gulf that temperatures in excess of what we can survive really begin to become quite common at the end of the century if we don't do anything to stop emissions. And projections of things like heat stroke death in the US are sailing up under these conditions. Now perhaps one of the worst risks is what we're doing to the oceans. And this is not a climate risk per se, it is a direct effect of carbon dioxide. This map shows the change over the last 30 or 40 years of the pH of the ocean. So pH has been falling in most regions. Where it's red, it's falling, and that means that the oceans are becoming more acidic. When you dissolve CO2 in water, it becomes more acidic, and the problem with that is it makes it more difficult for shell-building organisms in the ocean to go about their business of building shells. Corals, plankton, all of those things begin to struggle, and we're already beginning to see the effects of these in places like the Great Barrier Reef. So this has the ocean ecologists very concerned. Now, before I make you feel better, I'm going to make you feel a little worse. I'm sorry about that. That's one of the hazards of doing this kind of talk. It comes across as negative. Well, I don't know how to avoid that. What keeps me awake at night is reading the reports that are coming out of our own Defense Department, okay? And that, I'm going to let you read what they have to say about that. These are not your sort of fruit juice drinking and sandal wearing hippies, okay? These are rather serious people who wouldn't take this serious if they didn't consider it to be serious. So the Department of Defense recognizes the reality of climate change and the significant risk it poses to the U.S. The National Security Strategy issued in February 2015 is clear that climate change is an urgent and growing threat to our national security, contributing to increased natural disasters, refugee flows, and conflicts over basic resources such as food and water. These impacts are already occurring, and the scope, scale, and intensity of these impacts are projected to increase over time. We are already observing these in places like the United States, in the Arctic, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and South America. And they have whole conferences devoted to this. So what are they talking about? If you study the history of conflict, political conflict, it is often brought about by local food and water shortages. You could make that argument for the Arab Spring, for example. We may already be seeing climate refugees from that. So this is what keeps me awake at night. It is that the idea that our own Defense Department promulgates, that climate change begets political instability and increases the incidence of armed conflict, taken together with the fact that countries like Russia and China, partly to meet their own energy demands and ironically partly to try to get over to carbon-free energy, are building a lot of old nuclear technology, like water reactors, and leasing them to places like Pakistan. And what that does is it creates a big insecurity of the fuel cycle, the fuel going into the plants, which is enriched uranium, and the waste coming out of the plants, which is only slightly less enriched in some sense. And you are basically setting yourself up for nuclear terrorism. All right? That's what keeps me awake. Right? It's more so than some of the other risks. Okay, that's as bad as it's going to get. Now I'm going to try to make you feel a bit better. Okay? What are we going to do about this? Well, the obvious thing to do, I would argue, is to decarbonize. All right? Is this possible? How do we do it? Well, we, first of all, recognize that economists, even conservative economists, maybe even especially conservative economists, have always argued that in a free market, industries must be made to absorb the true costs of doing business. They're externalities, which are the hidden costs they impose on the rest of us, for example, by dumping pollutants in the atmosphere. There's no free market economist who says this is okay to do, all right? So you couple that with the recognition that if the fossil fuel industries today were actually made to pay for just their health externalities, especially if you throw in climate change externalities, they would not be particularly competitive. Right? The reason that we're subsidizing renewables is to compensate for the fact that we're making really, really huge subsidies for fossil fuels. They're explicit ones, and then there are these implicit ones because we're not making them pay for the true cost of doing business. So the solutions to that is widely recognized to be pricing carbon. Okay, we've got to price carbon. That idea comes originally from, believe it or not, conservative think tanks, so it ought to be something you get a lot of bipartisan support. I'm very proud of the fact that this state, Massachusetts, and particularly our wonderful state senator, Mike Barrett, who you'll hear from later this afternoon, have been taking the lead on doing this in Massachusetts. So I'm really happy to be a resident of Massachusetts, if only for that reason, but there are lots of other reasons, of course. So, what are we going to do? What are the solutions to this? There are renewables, solar and wind. The price of solar and wind has been coming way down. They might prevent, this is something that you have to recognize, they might ultimately meet about 30% of our demand. Only 30%. Well, the problem is that unless there's a miracle breakthrough in storage technology, when you get up to 30%, you hit a brick wall. It's called intermittency. Wind and solar are intermittent. It's possible for communities to be net zero only because they can tap into a grid that has other base load on it. There is some optimism that we can capture carbon, turn it into liquid or solid form and bury it, essentially. We can do it now, but it's too expensive. $200 per ton of carbon is the current estimate. There are reasonable prospects for reducing this to about $100 per ton, but there's not much incentive in the United States to do this. It's being done elsewhere. And then I would say that we have to consider next generation nuclear reactors as well. Fuel cells, Exxon itself is experimenting with fuel cells that not only capture carbon, but actually generate electricity in the process. So that's a very encouraging technology. Why do we have to do nuclear? Well, this is a chart, maybe it's a bit complex for this time, but this is just showing you how fast you can ramp up various kinds of energy sources based upon what's happened in history. These aren't theories, this is just simply what's happened. And so what you see on this, the curves basically show the added electricity to a grid as a function of the starting year from year 0 at the left all the way to year 11 on the right. The curves at the top are all nuclear energy, Sweden, France, and Belgium. The curves at the bottom are wind and solar. Wind and solar is great, I'm an advocate, but we cannot solve the problem with renewables alone. Now I know you don't want to hear that, but I'm telling you because in the energy industry this is widely accepted to be true. We have to add nuclear power. But that's kind of bad news. The good news is we don't have to add 60s nuclear power. We can do much better than that. For example, there's a whole bunch of different reactor technologies that are being experimented with, mostly not in the United States. Places like China, molten salt reactors, which are passively safe. They can run on nuclear waste from light water reactors, operate at ambient pressure, which makes them far less susceptible to explosion. They can run on thorium, which is more plentiful in the Earth's crust than uranium, and it's unsuitable for weapons, and you can have very long plant lifetimes. Here's a particular design that comes from a startup here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the costs of this nuclear power, this is perhaps getting a bit technical, but what you see on the left are the costs of what's called dispatchable technologies. These are not intermittent: coal, oil, gas, nuclear, geothermal, and biomass. And the costs of non-dispatchable technologies like wind and solar. The Navy has figured out how to take electricity, combine it or use it with seawater to actually generate gasoline. That is, they take dissolved carbon dioxide out of the water, they frack water molecules to get hydrogen, combine them into hydrocarbon fuels. They want that for their aircraft carriers. That's a carbon neutral process. It doesn't actually change the carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere. So if we have cheap electricity, we know how to make gasoline. That's a big, big deal, right? It means we can solve the aviation fuel problem. All right, so there's a lot of reason to be optimistic here. Let me summarize. If we don't do anything, unmitigated emissions of greenhouse gases, I would argue, present an unacceptably high risk to our children and our descendants in general. The largest risk might arise from the risk of armed conflict in a nuclear world, brought about by increasing shortages of water and food. Many new technologies, on the other hand, are making it possible to decarbonize modern civilization at low or even negative costs. It might actually be economically beneficial pretty quickly. And finally, those nations that lead the development of carbon-free technology are going to have the edge in the energy economy of the world, which is currently a $6 trillion annual economy. So shouldn't the United States, for example, be at that leading edge rather than at the trailing edge? I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
I think we have a couple minutes, times for questions. 2 minutes, Mark gives me. So if anybody has a quick question.
Yeah, I don't want to be, I wouldn't want to be a total pessimist, but let's say the do-nothing scenario winds up using all the carbon you could find, all the coal, natural gas. Is there enough carbon in the ground to generate the kinds of CO2 that you predicted by 2100, or did we just run out of fossil fuels?
Can everyone hear the question? Unfortunately, the answer is there's more than enough carbon, known carbon reserves, to do 1,200 parts per million in the atmosphere. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just repeat.
You're talking about the end of the century, but the research out of UMass Amherst last February presented us with the possible, well, they're basically saying that it's accelerating. So I'm just curious, does your information include that accelerated rate, or yes?
Yeah, yes, the information that I presented today was based again on the last IPCC report. And there are different scenarios, but the worst case scenario, which I showed you, sort of assumes we do nothing to curb carbon dioxide. And that the economies of countries like India and China continue to expand rapidly. The question was, is this accelerating more than the IPCC report? And there are indications, not so much that the carbon is, but the consequences might be. So Arctic sea ice, for example, is disappearing faster than we thought it would.
Mark, do we have time for another?
You said something about the cost, the levelized cost, but the fact is that in France and Germany and many other places, even in the US, nuclear power plants are currently being phased out because they're too costly. Now you showed some other figures. Are they for future technology or for present?
So the chart I showed was for a projection for the year 2018, 2 years from now. The chairman of Exelon, the largest utility in the United States, gave a talk about why nuclear is being phased out. Two things: the very low current cost of natural gas because of fracking, and the high subsidies for renewables. So renewables get subsidized, but nuclear essentially does not. That's why we're closing. We've lost more clean energy in the last 2 years by shutting nuclear power plants for economic reasons than we've gained by adding solar. So I love renewables, but I don't love 1 step forward and 2 steps backward.
How we doing, Mark? All right, I think that's all we have time for right now. Terry, thank you very much for
Okay. So the next panel, we hope you stay here for the next panel because we got an excellent panel. And the panel is all about, after you hear Carrie talk about the situation that we are confronted with, the struggles that we have, please feel free to come up here. The number one question that people tend to ask is, what can I do? How can I make a difference? Bill McKibben says it's the number one question that he asks in any one of his talks. How can I make a difference? And that's what we're here to talk about today, how you can make a difference in the Commonwealth. We have an excellent panel here from Sierra Club, Massachusetts, who are going to talk about making solar allies at the State House. We're going to hear from 350 Massachusetts about how how they have stopped a pipeline tax to create new natural gas infrastructure. We're going to hear from 350 from others out front about how we can plug natural gas leaks, and from Climate Action Business Association about how we can adapt to resiliently adapt to the coming climate change. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, and I'll get started. Emily Norton, who's the director of the Massachusetts Sierra Club, has got a great story about how we are being effective in Massachusetts. And then, following it all up, after these four folks, excellent organizations present, we're going to hear from Senator Mike Barrett about what he's doing in the state house.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction. It's great to be with my fellow panelists here, especially all female panel. You don't see that often enough, right? So again, my name is, yes, exactly. My name is Emily Norton. I am the Massachusetts director of the Sierra Club. Sierra Club has about 2 million members and supporters across the country and about 60,000 here in Massachusetts. So it's a phenomenal opportunity for me to be part of this organization that so many people are familiar with and are a part of. And so the story that I want to tell is that it was about a year ago at this time, the Massachusetts House voted 150 to 2 in favor of a bill that would have basically decimated our solar industry here in Massachusetts that employs thousands of people and good paying jobs, obviously pushing clean energy. And you know, when it's 150 to 2, that means it wasn't just conservatives, it wasn't just climate deniers, it was a lot of progressives as well, including my own. And so that was very frustrating for a lot of the advocates for obvious reasons, but also because it's not like we hadn't been doing anything. There had been lobby days, there had been some outreach, but we realized that we clearly hadn't done enough. And so particularly Sierra Club and Environment Mass and 350 and Mothers Out Front, a lot of the grassroots groups in particular started organizing meetings with some of the reps to say, what happened here? And my own, well, let's see, I'm not going to give away too much there. One particular rep said, well, you know, Emily, you know, you weren't in here. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that I needed to be in every office, even in the most progressive districts. So we all started organizing constituents to meet with their reps in the district to make it very clear that this is a really big deal. And the dirty little secret that I have is that I also serve as a city councilor in Newton. So I am familiar with that feeling of being on the inside and having so many people advocate to you for so many things, and you really can't keep up necessarily at the level that everyone would like because everyone feels like their issue is the most important. So the folks who bring a ton of people forward, a lot of emails, a lot of letters, make it obvious how important it is to them, those are the issues that are going to rise to the top. So we organized, Mark was at the meeting, a meeting with Corey Atkins, state rep out of Concord and Acton, and that was at the Concord Library, just about 10 or 11 people, but we were able to get into some level of detail on what that bill would do. Slashing the reimbursement rate. Basically, it was along the same lines of what, if you know the group ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, I see some heads nodding, really evil group that tries to do this same kind of approach that they're doing in Massachusetts in other areas. And Representative Atkins, a lot of the other reps who we talked to had no idea that this is on, you know, this was Alec's playbook, this particular bill. So to her credit, she took that energy and information from that meeting. She organized a meeting much wider with about 200 people, standing room only. And from then, she led the effort to do a sign-on letter, which sounds maybe boring or whatever, but this sign-on letter had a huge impact. She and several of the reps, many that Sierra Club worked with, and the other groups as well, led on sending out a letter to their colleagues, basically disavowing the bill that they had just written. It was pretty unprecedented, which was brought home to me when I was meeting with a state senator staff a couple weeks later. There were, there's 160 or so reps in the House. Over 100 signed on to this letter, basically saying, when we have our final bill, we need to fix this and this and this. So like I said, disavowing what was in the bill that they had just voted in favor of. And this staffer in the state set was like, did you see what happened with that solar letter? That was amazing. Like, it was really quite unprecedented to see that kind of disavowing of a bill that they had just passed. So long story short, the final bill that did get passed didn't get everything that we had wanted, but it did raise the net metering cap, which is what a lot of the industry folks were asking for. It restored the retail net metering rate. This stuff can get kind of boring, which does make it a little bit challenging when it comes to advocacy. But these are important details. Not all of them were fixed. There's more work to be done, but it was a real reversal from where we were. So the value is that people showed how much they cared, and if you're a state rep, you're a state senator, doesn't take that many people to show that you care. And I'll just have one more point before I pass it along. When I'm working with our volunteers or other volunteers to talk about what effective advocacy looks like, the thought experiment is pretend someone has given you a dare. I dare you to go into this party and see that random person over there. I dare you to go talk to them for 120 seconds about solar or clean energy or carbon tax or whatever the issue is for 120 seconds, and then we're going to test them 24 hours later on what they remember of what you said. That's what it's like advocating to your elected official. Not all of them. Some of them can take a lot more detail. But seriously, if you think about that, what would you give them a 40-page paper? Would you give them a 30-slide PowerPoint? You might have some visuals. You would probably have a story. You would think about a way, how can I have them remember this and why it matters so much to me? So think about that when you're sitting down with your rep or your senator or the governor or whoever you get to meet with, how you can tell your story in a very compact, compelling way. That's all I got.
So now, Nina.
I'm not very good with technology, so that is a show. Okay, great. Hi. So, do this. Welcome to Mothers Out Front. We are building a diverse national movement of mothers, grandmothers, and caregivers, powerful enough to convince our elected officials and business leaders to work aggressively for a swift, complete, and just transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. My thoughts today are centered around what I'm thinking of as like the anatomy of our movement: the heart, the head, the mouth, and the muscle. So here's the heart. This is my daughter, Eva. This photograph was taken about 3 months before I traveled to China to go pick her up. I brought her home on a plane to our little apartment in San Francisco, and the second night home, I was on the phone with the night nurse at Kaiser Hospital. The nurse could hear Eva struggling to breathe in the background. And I remember exactly her words. She said, "I don't like how she sounds. I think you should bring her in." I didn't know, sorry, this gets me. I didn't know that Eva had asthma. And I certainly didn't know how quickly asthma could turn into pneumonia, which I found out the second night back in that same emergency room. We know that climate change exacerbates the frequency and severity of the kind of asthma attack that Eva had that night. And I can talk about facts and figures all day long, but what I know is that no parent should have to watch his or her child struggle to breathe because of ill-informed, unwise, and dangerous energy choices that we're making today. Each of us has a story to share, And by sharing these with each other, Emily, I couldn't have asked for a better segue, thank you. By sharing these stories with each other, that's how we have involved moms in Mothers Out Front. A couple of months after I started volunteering with Mothers Out Front, I attended a rally. There were a lot of college students there, and they were talking about a grim, bleak view of the future, a world so unwelcoming that they were wondering if they would even choose to bring their own children into the world. This was heartbreaking to me. And I walked up to one of these kids afterward, and I said, you know, I thought I started doing this work because I love my kids. And you just made me realize that I'm doing this because I love you too. And that shift that took place in me that day was what some mothers' movements have called the socialization of motherhood. Once we feel that, it's a powerful motivator, and it's time to get down to work. So we form local community meetings, organizing teams. We accept roles, take on shared responsibility toward a common goal, and we enable each other to take action. Community organizing is learnable, it's teachable, it's learnable, it's doable, and it works. I'm on the Cambridge team. One of our first goals was to sit down with every one of our 9 city councilors and find out where our leverage points were, where they needed us, where we needed them. We quickly learned that this was a great tool for engagement. And so we set a goal to have 5 moms in every single meeting and always to invite a new mother. And that's how we grew. We've also teamed up with a lot of our allies, great friends, some of whom are familiar to you here. And with all due credit to Audrey Schulman from HEAT, Representative Lori Ehrlich, BU Professor Nathan Phillips, we got educated on the issue of gas leaks, the natural gas leaking, seeping up from under our streets. We learned that it's mostly methane. It's a powerful greenhouse gas, sometimes called a greenhouse gas on steroids. It harms human health. It kills trees. It can explode. And these leaks are everywhere. And you know who's paying for them? We are, as part of our utility bills. You tell that story to anyone you know. You show them a map of the leaks in their town, and the first thing they're going to do is go and find the leak closest to their house or their children's school. And now it's personal, and they're ready to take action. So you go back to the whiteboard. Now we're bigger and more powerful than we were at the beginning of the campaign. You go back to your whiteboard, you lay out your goals, you lay out your timelines, and you come up with a campaign. In Cambridge, we decided that mothers were going to raise a stink about gas leaks. We put signs up, and I know Lexington has done the same. Tag every single one of those gas leaks. In Cambridge, we have 231 of them. We used it as a family-friendly activity to make these invisible leaks visible and arguably make use of our best natural precious resources in the meantime. When mothers speak, people listen. I can't say that we were too disappointed when we found out that there was a gas leak right on the corner in front of Cambridge City Hall. These are our counselors standing in support of our efforts. And global warming, climate change, the climate crisis, whatever you want to call it, is a perfect example of thinking globally and acting locally. So us working with our local elected officials, we can really make change happen. When we helped turn out 120 mothers at a Boston City Council meeting to pass an ordinance to fix the gas leaks, someone referred to Mothers Out Front as the megaphone that makes the decision makers listen and the muscle that makes the utilities quake. The current new energy bill that came out of the statewide legislation, for the first time now, requires utilities to take into account the environmental impact of these gas leaks. But our story's not over. We are working to change the public narrative, the public understanding of natural gas as a so-called clean bridge fuel, because it's not. And we need all the power we can get. It's growing every day. Please join us. It's inspiring, it's empowering, it's really fun. And the best part about it is right here. This is Eva. She's 17 now. She outgrew her asthma. And I know that she knows that I'm doing everything I can to provide a livable climate for her and my stepson and my 12 nieces and nephews and all of your grandkids and children also.
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Anderson with 350 Mass Action. We are a climate organization that works on better climate policy in the state of Massachusetts. And it is an honor to be on a panel with speakers like these who are really key players in making better policy in our state. When Mark told me that the panel topic was making a difference in Massachusetts, I was really excited because people in communities like Lexington have an important and unique role to play in the climate movement. You guys understand the science, especially now after the last lecture we had. And now you're asking the question, okay, well, what are we going to do about the science? I would like to start by making the point that anyone on this panel could make, which is that people are much more powerful than they think they are. As Emily Norton was saying, just a few citizens speaking to their legislators, building relationships with their legislators, those are the kinds of things that actually make difference in the bills that are passed. And we see that from the inside. So we are always trying to convince you about how powerful you are. And I would like to tell you a story about one such instance when Massachusetts residents came together and had a huge impact on our state's energy policy. So this is the story of the pipeline tax, people versus the pipeline tax. The pipeline tax was a plan approved by Charlie Baker in 2015 that would force everyone who pays the utility bill to pay for extensive new natural gas pipelines. So this is a fossil fuel subsidy. It's exactly the opposite of what we want to see in our state, right? We'd rather see no subsidies than natural gas subsidies, okay? And the situation became worse when we realized that there were key state lawmakers who really wanted to legalize the pipeline tax in the major bill that they were working on in 2016. So with allies like the Massachusetts Sierra Club and like Mothers Out Front, we made a huge push to make sure that the energy bill didn't legalize Baker's pipeline tax. And furthermore, we wanted to see if we could pass a ban of that pipeline tax. And the culmination of that effort came with a major mobilization that we called the People Over Pipelines March. And with the support of our partners, our volunteer network decided to march along the length of those proposed pipelines, all the way from Medway to the Massachusetts State House. So we marched through Canton, through Sharon, Norfolk, Stoughton, through Boston neighborhoods, arrived at the Massachusetts State House, and had a rather large rally on the grand staircase at the State House. We got a lot of coverage, 60 media hits, 400 people participated in that march. We were featured, the march was a featured piece in the Boston Globe, on WBUR, And most importantly, State House insiders shared with us that we, quote unquote, moved the needle on the pipeline tax. In the end, the energy bill did not ban the pipeline tax, but it didn't legalize it either. And that became extremely important a couple of weeks later when the Supreme Judicial Court ruled the pipeline tax illegal. So we feel that without that mass demonstration of public opposition, it's very possible that that energy bill could have made that subsidy legal. Reflecting on that summer, we were happy with the way that the bill turned out. But we knew that it wasn't nearly enough to address the crisis that we were all facing. And we felt that a huge part of that was the influence of utility and fossil fuel companies. So when we thought about what we wanted to do next, we realized that we wanted to come up with a campaign that would make those contributions into political poison for lawmakers. And so we came up with the Clean Money for Climate Pledge. And we did a lot of research in the Office of Campaign and Political Finance, and we wrote a pledge that would allow state legislators to refuse campaign contributions from 10 major fossil fuel and utility companies that we feel have the most negative influence on climate policy in Massachusetts. We created a digital tool so that regular citizens could go online and log every time they asked one of their state reps or state senators, and so that they could see in real time who else had asked, how many times they'd been asked, had they agreed to sign, had they refused to sign. And today, with the election less than 2 weeks away, 73 candidates have signed the pledge. That includes 30 incumbents, so those are lawmakers who are already in office, 5 Republicans in leadership in the House and the Senate, and that includes your Jay Kaufman, the House Chairman of the Joint Committee on Revenue, who represents Lexington. So, I guess in conclusion, I would just like to invite you guys to pick a group here that has a message and tactics that excite you, and join us. If you're interested in the pledge, our website is 350 Mass Action, and I apologize that I did not put that on the slide, but you can come talk to me, talk to any of us about how you can get involved. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kate Delbo, and I'm the policy coordinator at Climate Action Business Association. We're a Boston-based group that works with small businesses across Massachusetts to help them take action on climate change. We work with businesses to reduce their contribution to climate change and enhance their resilience, to identify and act on opportunities to advocate for better climate policies, and together create a community of shared value. Through this shared vision, we strive to stop climate change in its tracks, but working with small businesses, we've realized that being able to adapt to the impacts of climate change is doubly important. We don't just know this from our relationships with our businesses and our stakeholders, but we actually have firsthand experience in this. Earlier this year, on one of the coldest days of the year, one of the pipes burst in our office space, and it flooded the entire building and left the space unusable. So we had to take action and move. Being able to mobilize your business and identify alternative solutions, all while keeping employee spirits high, it's not an easy task. Some would say, oh, one burst pipe, no big deal, but for a small business, one burst pipe could make or break their operations. Think back to a couple of years ago when we had the series of really bad snowstorms. And you walk out to the White Abyss, and what do you see? You see a lot of businesses are closed, but those few businesses with those lights on that are able to stay open act as hubs of the local community. This doesn't necessarily come easy. A report by the American Sustainable Business Council found that 25% of small to mid-sized businesses are unable to reopen at all after an extreme weather event. As an example, when Hurricane Sandy struck New York, a third of the businesses that were affected by the storm were unable to reopen at all. The median cost of downtime for a small business is roughly $3,000 per day. In addition, 1 in 5 businesses have had to lay off employees for something like a storm. Small businesses' assets are more concentrated. If you think of the mom and pop shop or the corner store in your neighborhood, most of these businesses only have 1 to a few facilities on their books. They don't get to benefit from the same access to capital and resources that a larger business would have. They don't get to benefit from the same geographic diversification that a large business may have. As a result, this makes small businesses more vulnerable to things like power outages or disruption in the supply chain or absence of employees. So, given these risks and this knowledge, what are small businesses doing about this? This past summer, we launched our Businesses Acting on Rising Seas campaign. We traveled to high-risk coastal communities throughout Massachusetts, and we spoke with over 500 small businesses about what they can do to make their business more resilient. So things like knowing your risk, taking stock of your inventory, and having a plan and standard operating procedures in place. We mostly traveled to coastal communities, and I know here in Lexington we're not on the coast, but obviously that doesn't mean we're immune to the impacts of climate change. Throughout the campaign, we also issued a survey, and the results were a little concerning. We found that of the businesses that we spoke to, 80% did not have a plan in place for emergencies or an extreme weather event. This is even higher than the American Sustainable Business Council report that found that nearly 60% did not have a plan. And this is especially concerning given our vulnerability here in Massachusetts. Businesses need the best available resources to act. We hope that by providing them with the resources, the information, and tools, it will create a community that is more able to spur action. We saw extraordinary success with this campaign. We saw recognition from the White House, and we'll be doing it again next summer, hopefully traveling to more communities throughout Massachusetts, and now some communities throughout the country want to do their own BARS campaign as well. But despite this success, and despite the need for a business to have a plan, Massachusetts as a state also needs to have a clear plan. This isn't just about lessening the impacts of storms. This is also about making sure that our electrical grid, our infrastructure, our economy are prepared for the impacts of climate change. Recently, the governor issued an executive order which said, among other things, it directed his agencies to create climate change adaptation plans. This is a great first step, but it has no authority beyond his agencies and his administration. What we really need is a more comprehensive plan. Last legislative session, we were working to pass a bill that would create a comprehensive adaptation management plan and be able to prepare us as a state for the impacts of climate change. It was moved from the Senate to the House 4 times and failed to pass, probably due to a lot of the reasons that Emily touched on. So we'll be working on this again next session. And you can bet that after speaking with over 500 small businesses this summer, that the voice of the local business community will be stronger than ever. In addition to resilience, since this is just one piece of promoting a sustainable future, I just wanted to touch on a few other things that we're working on at CABA. The key to our sustainability program is developing a climate action business plan. We work with the business and cater to their operations to develop strategies that they can take to take action on climate change. We're also getting ready to launch a new online tool called BSpark. It stands for Business Sustainability Performance and Reporting Kit. It allows businesses to track their energy, waste, water, and transportation usage, kicks out a greenhouse gas footprint, allows them to set goals and track their performance over time. I highly encourage you to go visit our table and talk to Paulina. She's what I call our sustainability wizard, and she can help you guys work you guys through the program. We're also cooking up a new exciting tool that uses BSpark that allows businesses to implement their very own internal carbon price. You can use the price to guide your business decisions, or you can set the money aside in a fund to go to internal carbon reduction or sustainability projects. We'll also be continuing efforts on Beacon Hill to promote a regulatory carbon price, but we've got Senator Mike Barrett here, who I'm sure will talk about his leadership of that in the state. In addition to carbon pricing and climate adaptation policy, we'll also be working to help promote more fair solar policy, greater deployment of renewable energy, plugging the natural gas leaks, and of course opposing new natural gas infrastructure. So thank you guys so much for letting me come here today and talk. Again, I highly encourage you to visit our table, learn more about the exciting things that we're up to and how you can get involved in our shared vision.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience before Senator Mike Barrett comes up and talks about how he can make a difference in Massachusetts. So, please, questions for the panelists, Sierra Club, Mothers at Front, 350 Massachusetts.
I'm curious about how big your membership are that you have in your different organizations, because I think you have a fairly large footprint, but I'm curious how many members you have, if there is such a statistic.
Yeah, our list is about, I think it's 13,000, and people who sign up with us are signing up to take action, so those are members and volunteers, not just people who get our emails. Yeah.
So we have about 19,000 paying members, and then another 40,000 or so that get our stuff and have taken action. The paying members are particularly valuable, I will say, not just because there's income, but also under campaign finance laws when we do certain political activities, such as let people know about who we've endorsed, call on folks to help us get out the vote for our candidates. We're only allowed to reach out to members. $15, just saying.
We have close to 90 members, but through our network we have a couple hundred. We did start in 2012, so we're small, but we're definitely growing.
I don't know how to answer this question, and I'm hoping maybe some of the mothers out front here do. Lisa?
Sure. We have over 3,000 members, and we started in February of 2013.
Thank you. I'm not good with numbers.
We started in 1892, so we have a little.
I have a question about the post-pipeline tax landscape. I'm sure these utilities and gas companies are going to come back with another wheeze. Do you have any notion of what the next thing we're going to have to fight is going to be?
Well, on the theme of the pipelines continuing to come back, there will be an action Monday morning where everybody's dressing up as zombies to protest the zombie pipeline because they keep coming back from the dead in all of these iterations. It's kind of hard to foresee, but it's looking like because so many states have ruled the pipeline tax illegal in New England that it will be difficult. But because a lot of states are looking to Massachusetts, the utility companies are very focused on influencing policy in Massachusetts. So a lot is at stake for them as well. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there's strong motivation for it to come back again, the tax.
We will be at South Station on Monday morning from 8 to 9:30. I am purchasing zombie masks after this. We'll be handing stuff out to commuters. It's super fun if anyone wants to come by.
Well, thank you so much, and with that, we'll ask Senator Mike Barrett to come up and talk about how we can make a difference in Massachusetts at the state level.
I'm going to try to speak without a mic, if that's okay, but tell me if it doesn't work. I'm feeling lonely. I hadn't anticipated that the panel would leave because there's a sense in which this is really a collective presentation. I just want to tell you how well the folks who you just heard from have succeeded. Lest you think that everything is hopeless in politics, many things are hopeless in politics, but not everything. We came within about 5 votes in the Massachusetts State Senate, thanks to the work of the groups you just heard from and others. We came within about 5 votes of having a 21-vote majority out of the 40 state senators in Massachusetts for putting a price on carbon, one of Kerry Emanuel's recommendations. We are very close, and not because of the eloquence of any current state senators, me included. It really is because of the grassroots organizations the green business organizations, the environmental groups, the activists, they really did get to successfly a lot of senators. I'm feeling sheepish about, and Emily gets to go because she has to buy her mask.
I'm tweeting.
Oh.
If I don't tweet this, it didn't happen.
So Emily put an interesting proposition to you concerning the likes of me. She said, as a thought exercise, imagine talking to an elected official for 2 minutes, imparting a message. I think Emily asked us to reflect on how many elected officials, Joe, you can help me out here, would remember it. Well, I can tell you that the chances of my remembering it the first time, I will concede, are relatively low. Any new message. Give me a message twice, I'm kind of starting to tune in. The genius of lobbying, and all these organizations know it, is that by the time you say something to us the 5th time, we remember. And we start to learn. Maybe, I'm not sure I'm much different than your typical 4th grader, but it's been a long time since I've been in 4th grade. I shouldn't besmirch them by association. Repetition is the key to lobbying. If you guys can help the organizations or just act on your own behalf and communicate with us repetitiously, we will start to tune in. But here's the additional challenge. I take a look at the 40-member state Senate and I ask, well, where are my additional votes for a carbon fee or a carbon tax going to come from? And I start to think of Massachusetts a little bit like we're thinking of the country these days, right? Big dichotomy between red America and blue America. And all of us who take even a passing citizen's interest in the polarization within the country are asking ourselves, well, regardless of who's elected president, I hope to God that's Hillary Clinton, how are we going to bridge the divides that will exist the day after the election just as much as they exist or will exist the day before? In Massachusetts, there's a little bit of a red state, blue state going on in this sense. Democrats from less prosperous areas of the state, and when all is said and done, that's most of the state, essentially anything outside greater Boston, it seems, plus outside the Amherst, Massachusetts. There are only a couple of places that are deeply, deeply blue. Otherwise, Democratic state senators and state reps are thinking to themselves when they hear messages from me or from the advocates, my constituents don't know where the heck their jobs are going to come from. They don't know where the hell the jobs for their kids are going to come from. They haven't the slightest idea how their kids are going to be able to afford either college or health insurance 20 years from now. So these folks are coming to me. I get it. I'm not a denier exactly. You're asking me to expend political capital on behalf of what's essentially a price increase on the cost of gasoline and home heating oil. And I'm telling you that my constituents have other priorities. There's a way to overcome that gap too. Massachusetts' own version of red state, blue state. But it's not easy. And it's a thought question. I haven't got any glib answers to offer today. I do know that the kind of mobilization that you just heard about is critical. The question is, do you have enough votes? And this is a rhetorical question. It's not a question I'm putting to the panelists. Do you have enough votes in Everett? I'm not saying you don't have any votes in Everett or any members in Everett. Do you have enough votes in Everett? Do you have enough votes in Fall River, in Worcester, even in Lowell, which has a very vibrant 350.org chapter, I might add? The answer is we got votes everywhere. I think that would be the answer today. But we don't know in blue-collar areas that have deindustrialized over the last 60 or 70 years, we don't know yet if we have enough to move the state rep or the state senator to really sign on. So, only 5 votes, at least in my branch. That's a number we ought to be able to pick up, but there is this problem, and it's a problem for the country, and it's a problem, you might say, a moral problem, not just a political one, for each one of us, and we've got to get past that too. And with that, I just want to invite any suggestions, any good ideas, any questions. Yes, hi.
Hi. So in the political cycle, we tried really hard, a lot of the groups tried really hard to support that carbon tax, or carbon
fee.
Rebate, right, it's very important. So what's up, on the timeline for that this year?
So the way stuff works in Massachusetts is we reinvent ourselves as a legislature every 2 years. We will be sworn in January following this November election. We will have to file all our ideas anew, those that did not become law last time around. So we get to tweak the bill a little bit. I've gotten a lot of input from folks, but the carbon fee bill will remain, I think, the same in its generalities. And that's this, by the way. We're earnestly trying to enroll Charlie Baker and Republicans as supporters. We don't have a single Republican legislator in either the House or the Senate as a co-sponsor of carbon pricing. The revenue neutral piece is designed to accommodate people who are either nervous about taxes or have taken no new tax pledges, which is the case for many Republicans. You get the same bang out of your buck in terms of pricing in the externalities that flow from using carbon if it's neutral and essentially you give the money back to people after you price energy correctly, than if you hold on to the money and use it for a good governmental purpose. Either way, you're properly pricing carbon. We've taken the revenue neutral approach because we want, honestly, the support of moderates who believe that climate change is real, and we want the votes of Republicans. I don't think we're that far away, but we haven't gotten a single Republican co-sponsor yet. Here's what I think is going to happen in the next 2 years, and I'm an optimist for action in the next, concerning a breakthrough. I think Hillary will be elected president, last minute breaking news notwithstanding. I think she's going to put a price on carbon. I think the particulars are perhaps going to be left to the individual states, much as President Obama's clean energy plan, clean electric energy plan, left particulars to the individual states. And here's where today, if you forced me to guess, I think the Baker people will come out. And this is just a guess, but I'm trying to puzzle through their ambiguous signals myself. I don't think they want to put a price on carbon for this reason. I don't think they want to raise the price of people's home heating oil. I think they're open to pricing, of course, electricity is already priced because we have something called RGGI. The big gap, well, space heating, both business and residential, is a big gap, but the biggest gap of all is transportation. I think of Lisa's electric car as a solution there. I think Stephanie Pollack, Baker's Secretary of Transportation, is willing to put a price on gasoline, which is about 40% of our carbon emission problem, but I think Baker is unwilling to put a price on home heating oil, which is about 25% of our carbon emissions problem.